Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the Muse Cyber webinar. We're here to talk today with Natasha and Saj about how smaller businesses and startups can access enterprise customers, and some of the hurdles that they might face will help you unblock them today. Natasha.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. So I'm Natasha Maddock. I'm the legal director at Titania, which is a cyber resilience company that helps organizations to build and maintain resilient and compliant networks. So we monitor routers, switches, firewalls, detecting misconfigurations and reducing attack surfaces for businesses. I'm a lawyer by background. I have trained in private practice before moving in-house and spent the last 12 years leading global legal teams in tech and data businesses. So sit on both sides of that, both as a supplier into large enterprise clients, but also as a buyer of kind of products and services, leading those kind of risk and compliance teams as well.
Thank you very much. Saj.
Thanks, Jonathan. Hi, I'm Saj Huck. I'm Chief Commercial Officer at a company called Plexor. So we're an innovation business that helps governments and enterprises navigate the emerging tech ecosystem and collaborate with novel technologies. We have a heavy focus on areas such as cybersecurity, as well as kind of broader kind of critical technology areas that matter for defense, security, resilience, and sovereignty. For the purposes of this conversation, I guess I'm coming into it with twofold. One is helping businesses, work into those sectors, but also as a chief commercial officer of a company that also collaborates with enterprises and governments and navigates many of these issues ourselves.
Great, thank you very much. To our first question, Natasha.
Thanks, Jonathan. So I guess there are probably three key things that businesses should think about when looking at their contracts. Now, the most obvious one that lawyers always tend to run to is liability, but it is an important one. Some businesses feel that by limiting their liability entirely, trying to exclude everything, that they put themselves in a safer position. But the reality is that your customers are going to expect you to take some responsibility for the services you're providing, and your limitation of liability clause gives you the opportunity to set out the upper limits on any financial liability that you have. So the first thing I'd suggest that businesses do is just have a look at your insurance documentation. That will give you your professional liability levels, and it also might set out any conditions that you have, so what that insurer expects to see in your contracts, and that's a great starting point.
There's table stakes as well, right? At the moment.
Yeah.
So if you're going into government or the NHS or even like an academy trust, Cyber Essentials or Cyber Essentials Plus is now mandated by government, depending on the contract you're bidding for in the public sector. And even they are a way of testing your business and making sure that you've got the minimal level of security that we should have in the UK, really.
It's really important that you want to come across as a credible provider of services. I think, one of the other areas that's really key is around the warranties that you're providing. So the promises you make about your products or services, that might be service levels within your agreement, or just setting out what it is you're going to be delivering and how you're going to be delivering it. Again, by cutting out everything, what you'll find is that you get two responses from a customer. The first is to say, this isn't a credible provider, I'm walking away. The legal team, the procurement team may very well veto you as a supplier because you haven't got what they're expecting to see in the contract. And the second part is that they will then send you their procurement documentation, which will often include way more extensive warranties, service schedules, things that they want you to comply with. And if that's not tailored based on what you actually can deliver within your business, it's really difficult to get the balance right at that point. And you might find that you end up having to tailor your services to be very specific around an individual customer needs, rather than having something that is suitable for the wider customer base that you might be providing to. So definitely suggest that you take some time to understand what it is that you can deliver, what promises you can stand behind, and then build those into your contracts.
Oh, great. Thank you. I've seen recently a little bit more focus on operational resilience and so business continuity, disaster recovery. When a larger business is trusting a smaller business with their data, it's not always just confidentiality they're worried about. It's whether it's got integrity. So do you know that the data is the same as when you left it? And availability. Can I come back and get it at all? And we work with a number of organizations where on going in, we look at business continuity and plans, and we sit with their board and ask them, what would you do in a crisis? And often, for example, in a remote first business, you might have a business continuity plan and they keep it in a folder in SharePoint. There is a minor problem with that, though, that all of these cloud services are only available before you've been ransomwared. So should you ever get ransomwared and you're unable to access your online cloud storage, you don't have a business continuity plan. We encourage everybody to print it out, for example, which sounds really daft, but have a paper copy in your house, because your disaster recovery plan and even the phone numbers for your team are only available while you're online, and you're no longer online. We saw that a couple of weeks ago when there was the cloud storage fail. A number of organizations that run instant messaging relied on that. So internally, the instant messaging disappeared and they couldn't contact each other. These things you need to test and have a backup for, which might just be having the mobile phone number for your colleagues in your phone or written on a bit of paper. It's amazing that how much of a difference these simple steps make when you get ransomware, when somebody clicks on a link, and it does happen. Last 6 months were a lot worse.
Completely agree. I think now the sort of cybersecurity data protection is absolutely the table stakes. It's what businesses are expecting to see from you. And if you're not clear about how you're protecting their data, how you're managing their data, how you're processing their data, again, that's something that can really damage your credibility. So spend some time working through with your technical teams, your product teams, understanding what information you're receiving, how you're storing it, how you're processing it, and then build around those policies to make sure that if the worst were to happen, you were to lose access to a particular system, what would you do and how would you manage it? I think that, again, people assume that some of the business continuity requirements are just for big business. Oh, we're not going to be targeted. It's not going to hit us. What we've seen from more recent attacks is that actually your entire attack surface is all of your suppliers, everybody that you might be integrating with. And so it's a much easier in for some of those attackers to come via a smaller supplier that might be feeding into a bigger business, government infrastructure. So making sure that you've got those processes in place, you know that you're resilient and that you can bounce back and respond should an attack happen, is really important. So I love that, Jonathan, around having just a printout available. It's really sometimes the simplest solutions. Things like your insurance policy, I would check that as well to look at, do you have cyber cover? If you were to get hit by something, are you going to be able to get legal support, PR support? And are there restrictions or limitations about how you access that? So again, you may not know, but certain insurance companies will want you to use their panel law firm in the event that you're looking to claim on that insurance policy. So having that information to hand, speaking to the lawyers in advance, having the numbers printed out so that if something were to happen, you can act quickly. It's those sorts of things that you don't think about until
that's a good point around third-party risk. And actually what we're seeing is that the parties that subcontract into the third parties are also now of interest. So if a third party of yours, a direct supplier to you, is reliant on their own SaaS provision, then they're often now required to disclose it. So whether they rely on third-party messaging services or fractional resources and consultants and delivery that isn't inside their own business. A couple of the banks call that extended enterprise. So anybody that's going to embarrass them, they try to assure. So they look at the third parties and then they'll go down to fourth and fifth and keep going until their data is no longer in play. Serge, when an enterprise is looking at a startup, you work with a lot of startups in your business at Plexel. When an enterprise comes to you and says, we'd like to work with one of these businesses, can you recommend one? What is it that they're looking for as table stakes or even better than that when you're recommending somebody to work with an enterprise?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, I think, in our experience, whilst obviously a lot of these organizations tend to start to explore collaborating with earlier stage businesses and startups to solve a particular problem, the focus on whether a technology actually addresses that need is quite a small part of the decision cycle. Initially, it's obviously about, is it even worth investing in, a new capability? But once you get past that, I think then, there's broader kind of functional aspects that come into play. So firstly, what is the commercial maturity of the business? And then then the actual product itself, what level of technical maturity is it? What are the security aspects of that product? What's the cybersecurity posture of the company? Then, what are the risks and opportunities for me utilizing that product as well? What would be the impact on my supply chain, if any? How does this lead to economies of scale with existing kind of vendor relationships I might have potentially? And then lastly, what does this obviously mean for my data privacy, my own kind of security posture as well?
Okay, yeah, and in critical national infrastructure in the defence world, similar to public sector, we have the sovereignty of the data as well, whether it leaves the country, whether in the supply chain of this third party, they're busily using lower cost cloud storage because it's not in the UK and generally that's cheaper. Which requires separate instances. And then you go round that circle and back to legal again around mandating that the data never leaves the country. And there might be a slightly higher cost to that because it's not being kept in the cheapest locations for big data centers and all that. Do you see much of that? I agree that the onus of founders and the startup teams, they've got an amazing product, right? And they want to get it into a business, and they cannot understand why there might be lots of these other hurdles to surmount. But the enterprise is talking to them because they're interested in it. So if the founding team can look at, well, I need this governance and I need a couple of advisory people on this, and I might need to run this management a little bit differently, you can make sales into larger enterprises and governments and all of that. Do you, I know Plexel runs a number of runways on this stuff and really helps with it. Do you still see that there are any areas that people misjudge? Are there things that they need to be better at or have ready sooner in the life cycle of the startup?
Yeah, I think so I think there's some technical aspects. I mean, just broadly from a commercial perspective, so often what we see, and in particular of quite IP rich businesses or product centric companies, is that sometimes there's a commercial awareness that's lacking in an earlier stage business. So understanding actually from a customer's perspective their own decision making processes, but also the kind of the risk thresholds that they'll have. What is the context of their organization? You mentioned about critical national infrastructure, well, highly regulated, potentially going to become more, well, it is going to become more regulated.
Yeah.
And those verticals, with incoming cybersecurity legislation this year, and actually having situational awareness of those aspects, because these are kind of running through your potential customer's mind. So how are you helping or not with that posture, I think is really important. Because like I said, I don't think necessarily unfortunately, like in particular in these kind of mission critical and high stakes environments, often it's not the best technology that wins. It's the easiest kind of ease of deployment, the easiest, the product that has potentially the lowest total cost of ownership, potentially the best, more effective and efficient support model around it, but also something that integrates well with the wider technology stack is important. So understanding that and in particularly in the early stages of a process, maybe before you've even got into procurement. So when you're talking to customers about where they're, what does their broader technology stack look like, I think it's useful to garner that insight.
That's a good point. Before you've even got into the procurement cycle, there are a number of trust signals you can exhibit. Things like having the Cyber Essentials badges on your website, but also testimonials from similar customers, There are review sites for B2B as well that you can use. Natasha, do you have any views on how people can show that with public service level agreements and references and their terms of service or consumption models, either being easy to try but not getting locked in? What do you look for when you're buying something like that?
There's a few things. For me, you build credibility by providing that information, really understanding and knowing your product. So you can create a trust center space where you include, high level information around the security you've got in place, your privacy processes, sort of certifications and those sorts of things. It's also about your product proposition, so really understanding your audience and knowing which version of your product is the right fit for your customer base. So at Titania we have a variety of different products, some of which are air gapped solutions, which are more suitable and more appropriate for those kind of national infrastructure, military organizations, those types of customer bases, because they don't want anybody else to have access to their data. They want it in their own secure environment. So they want to be able
Sure.
to use it, but they don't want that level of risk around the data being transferred out. Whereas for other customers, actually a lower cost solution that is available through an online purchase might be an appropriate route to market, but you need to think about who the audience is and what it is that they need. And then when it comes to trials and evaluations, again, there are lots of different ways that you can show the value in your product. You can, if you've got the ability to do it, is to give somebody access for a small period of time for them to try the live version. But you could also, for example, do a small data test. So receive some data in, process it, return some results back out to them. Or you might be able to create a sandbox type version, which doesn't allow them to use it for live data or live services, reducing the risk, but lets them look at the feel and the usability of your product. So again, think about what your USP is. What is the value that you're providing to your customer? How can you demonstrate that to them in the easiest way for them to consume it in that short period of time to build that trust up? And that will vary depending on the type of business you're in. But think about that at the early stages, I would say.
No, thank you. And Saj, to follow on with that, I think what Natasha was describing in part there was around proof of values and getting the sales cycle to be shorter, giving it to them for free with limited data or synthetic data so they can test value. And that helps shorten the sales cycle, right? Which I don't know if that's still true, but when I was on a Plexel runway, the sales cycle was one of the things people were talking about. Getting into an enterprise might take you slightly longer than your venture capital funded runway, which obviously is a bit awkward. What comment have you on that?
Yeah, agreed. I think, I mean, obviously smaller deployments, more collaborative deployments, like low or no cost deployments as well, help you navigate those kind of earlier stages of the process. Obviously, the objective from an organization is to become sticky, right, in the environment, and but also often find that founders, particularly if they've not been exposed to kind of corporate and enterprise level buying processes, they don't necessarily know if it's the first time, like how to navigate those different thresholds and delegated approvals. And ultimately, a really good objective is coming under a specific spend threshold, right? So you've got a kind of more localized decision that can be taken, and then using that to obviously grow with your customer over time as well. But I do think there is something around, the point I made earlier about still it's important to, like, yeah, okay, you can limit the level of or amount of customer data in a product or an initial deployment, and that might be helpful in testing the general efficacy of your solution. But I think it's important to also simultaneously understand the kind of the posture of the organization around those things before you get into the procurement process, because it will help you set the strategy of how you might navigate that in the future or things that you might need to put in process. Last point I'll make is that I think the challenge around security and privacy is really hard for organizations, because depending on the nature of your technology and the sector you're selling to, you've got a dual-sided challenge. One is the security of and the posture of your own enterprise and how that kind of marries up as a supplier into an enterprise customer. The other is the security of your product. Sometimes the latter is somewhat overlooked.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important. And we're seeing this particularly with AI. The amount of questions that have been asked of companies who have got some AI integration into their product of people who are non-technical
Right.
in the procurement chain is quite significant, and I think it's important to prepare for that.
Yeah, and secure by design from when you start. So I realise that's hard for businesses that are already 10 years in, but if you're going to add AI, plan for that to be in a demonstrably secure way rather than just using an AI, an API even.
I think one of the challenges for businesses, especially if you're in that kind of startup scale up space, is that it can feel quite overwhelming. So you've got T's and C's you need to create, you've got policy documents you need to create. You really need to sort of build that privacy by design, that security by design into your products. And it can be difficult to think about investing in sort of senior legal support from a general counsel or legal director or from cybersecurity experts. But actually nowadays there are a lot of organisations and a lot of individuals that can work on a fractional or part-time basis. So I would say if you are considering whether it's a first legal hire or something similar, don't necessarily think, oh, I've got a limited budget, therefore I need to bring in a junior lawyer. It can be quite difficult working in that kind of startup scale up environment and making sure that you've got the right terms, the right policies. So having somebody at a more senior end on a part-time basis is likely to give you a better outcome than having a full-time, more junior team member. I don't know, Jonathan, is that similar? Have you seen a similar thing from a cyber perspective?
We do, and it's one of the things that Muse Cyber offers to the market, along with vendor risk, supply chain assessment, and so on. On the fractional side, people often need enterprise grade advisory, and they want access to, as you say, rather than a more junior team. They do need somebody that's been there, seen there, had a couple of breaches and survived and learned the lessons, but they can't afford a whole one. And even if they could afford one and they've just done a Series B, they don't need a whole one at that point. They need part of a enterprise size A. When you look at the fractional market, there are a number of ways to do this. Part-time, you can, so Monday, Tuesday size A, you can do fractional where it's about outcomes, and they work quite well. I would venture that with cyber, one of the challenges is that just acquiring a fractional CISO doesn't always achieve the aim. And that's because that very senior person with enterprise grade experience hasn't been on the tools or run a risk register for a number of years. And so really what you want to do is get a fractional or part-time cybersecurity team that comes in. And you can do that from the larger organizations. Muse Cyber has been built to do that for SMEs. So we go in as a team and we have GRC analysts and application security engineers and people that support the CISO that comes in from the Muse CISO team. And that's working really well. So you get all of those things, but in a proportionate way, rather than hiring them all in one go. It's also landing well with some of your other runway colleagues. So I don't know whether you see this in your market with other specializations, but it's working well on cyber.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think as well, like this is an area where it's difficult to kind of gauge, particularly when you're in the earlier stages of growing a business, to get to an affordable and right-sized solution. So I think this is definitely like a really valid approach, particularly for companies that don't need lots of in-house capacity as such, but just need access to specific expertise.
I agree. Yeah, it's and possibly in a time limited way. So you might have a project like enterprise sales access go to market and needing to prove that you are cyber secure. You might have a big supply chain that all of a sudden to access a customer you need to validate and some assistance for that. So it might be a contained project rather than an ongoing thing. But yeah, we're seeing that market grow mostly because of the nature of the threat. And the obligations it places on us to stay safe. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Serge. Thank you, Natasha, for joining. I very much appreciate your time. I'm sure all of our viewers will appreciate hearing your views on accessing enterprise sales targets, even if you're an SME. If anybody gets stuck, I'm assuming that they can reach out to you directly on LinkedIn or similar. If you'd like an introduction, please let me know and I will facilitate that. Have a great day. Thank you.